A few of you have been asking me to cover the One Piece infection AU, aka the One Piece virus, which was created by the YouTuber Wasuga-chan. And I put this one off for a while because I didn't think it was going to be good, and since One Piece is one of my favorite animes of all time, I didn't want to be disappointed, but I'm happy I checked it out because this one was pleasantly surprising. Now, this virus starts out when a man was wandering around an island, basically starving to death and looking for food, and he ended up finding a strange looking fruit on the ground. Now, as a One Piece fan, I immediately knew that this was a devil fruit just by the design, but since this guy was starving, he didn't really care if it was a devil fruit or poisonous, he just needed to eat, so he took a bite. And almost immediately after that, he found out that the fruit he had eaten was called the Chuma Chuma fruit. And fun fact, I believe the creator of this AU is Russian, and Chuma in Russian means plague or epidemic. And that's kind of what we see this fruit causes. When the person took a bite out of the fruit, they immediately fell victim to the infection with bright yellow pus-filled bulbs spreading all over their body. But that isn't even the most dangerous part. Apparently, this fruit has a mind of its own, and once someone takes a bite out of it, it will begin to release a gas that can spread the virus up to 30 kilometers. And for my fellow Americans, that is roughly 48 miles. And any person or animal that comes into contact with that gas will be infected, and when they expire, they'll release the gas as well, which will spread it even further. So I'm sure you can all imagine that a virus like this will spread very quickly, and to make matters even worse, the devil fruit also releases roots into the ground that will grow so long that they will eventually make it to the ocean, where fish will begin to nibble at the yellow balls that contain the virus. This will cause the fish to also get sick, die, and then infect other fish, sea kings, and even people who may eat the fish before they start showing signs of the infection. And hopefully this will paint a picture of just how this infection spreads and why it took over the One Piece universe so quickly. Now, surprisingly, in this virus origin video, we also get to see Crocodile is trying to find a cure, or rather, he's captured Dr. Karuha, and he's trying to force her to find a cure. And I'm just saying real quick, hear me out.
Hey, yo, what the?
Now, all jokes aside though, you can tell that this situation is dangerous because this doctor is one of the smartest people in this verse, and she is saying that there is no cure, or at least not one that she can figure out alone. And if she's completely stomped, that means that the world is definitely in big trouble. Now, moving over to the Straw Hats, we get this scene of Luffy sleeping, but being woken up by Usopp. And if you think this face right here is creepy, when you see his whole body, you'll definitely be freaked out. The virus seems to not only take people out, but sometimes it mutates their bodies, and we see here that Usopp now has a spider-like body. He actually looks like a Drider from the D&D game, meaning that he is half human, half spider. And the reason that Usopp comes into Luffy's room is because he wants to take a bite out of him, because at the moment, this universe is going through a food shortage since everything is being affected by the virus. But luckily, Nami comes in and sprays Usopp down, stopping him from getting absolutely destroyed by Luffy, because spoilers, even in his corrupted form, Luffy still low dips Usopp. The next corrupted Straw Hat we see is Zoro, and it looks like he was bitten by someone, which is another one of the ways that the virus can spread. And while it doesn't show it on a YouTube video, when you check the TikTok channel, it actually tells us that he was bitten by one of the Black Cat's pirates. I believe it was Sham. Because if you remember the episode, Zoro actually fought against two of the pirates, one of them being Sham, another one being his brother. And it seems like Chopper is trying to keep the wound clean and possibly cure Zoro, since his infection isn't as bad as Usopp. Well, only one of his eyes really been affected, and then we see some of the bulbs are on his arm, and there may be some on the back of his neck, but his body hasn't fully transformed. We also get this scene here where Chopper tries to burst the bulb on Zoro's eye, only for it to reinflate, showing that you can't just like burst these things or chop them off because they'll likely just grow right back. Now, after checking up on Zoro, we see that Chopper then heads over to Usopp's room to give him his checkup, but it doesn't go as well as Zoro's did. We see Usopp appear out of the darkness looking just as crazy as he did in the Luffy scene, but unlike with Luffy, he actually lashes out at Chopper, saying that he's hungry and he's happy that Chopper delivered himself up to be eaten. But I think Usopp must have forgot that Chopper is definitely not weak, and he is able to break free of Usopp fairly easily by turning into his bruiser form, or aka the heavy point form. And after staring Usopp down and then spraying him with some water, Chopper is able to examine him without any issues, even having a cute little moment where he tickles Usopp's spider body. showing that he has no hard feelings towards him. But I think the most important thing about this chapter is that we see that even Chopper is having a hard time finding a cure, and hunger is also starting to get the best of the crew. Next, we have this little filler animation, but I wanted to add it because we see that not even the Marines have avoided the plague, with Smoker being one of the victims. And at this point of the animation, Smoker was a real issue for the Straw Hats, especially Luffy. So now that his smoke is able to also infect people, Luffy fighting him would be a death sentence, which is why he is full running away from him here. But luckily for him, his brother Ace, who is the freaking GOAT, is there to bail him out, confronting Smoker and actually making pretty quick work of him, which is pretty canon, really. Ace was definitely stronger than Smoker at this point, and now that Smoker's ability is more poison gas than smoke, Ace is able to use Smoker's ability against him, igniting his poison and making it damage him. And even though Ace could have really done him in, he doesn't finish him off, and he instead allows Tasigi, I believe is her name, to carry him away. Now, the next person that we see that gets corrupted is Nico Robin, and her corruption looks very different than the other people we've seen thus far. She doesn't have any bulbs growing on her body, but her veins and eyes have taken a yellow tint, showing that she is indeed corrupted. Now, when looking at Robin's stat sheet, we also learn a couple of interesting things. The first one being that while Zoro ends up getting weaker when he gets infected, Robin has the opposite effect and gets way stronger. It even says on here that her hands are now black, they have sharp fingers, and they're about twice as strong as they were before. And just to put that into perspective, Robin was already able to crack people's necks fairly easily, so if you double her strength, that's going to make her very formidable. We also learned that the Straw Hats have been working with Crocodile and the Doctor to some degree, and they've come up with what they're calling a trial prescription, which I think is just like a vaccine that they're trying out on people. And it kind of makes sense that they would reach out to the Straw Hats because they have both Chopper and Robin, who are two of the smartest people in the verse as well, so that really doesn't surprise me at all. Now, the next few characters that I'm going to name aren't playing a huge role in the parts of this series that have been animated, but I imagine that they're going to have a bigger role in the future. And the first person I want to talk about is going to be Vivi. And while at the moment her infection isn't too bad because it's only at stage 1, she did end up having to amputate one of her arms, and I assume she did that to stop it from spreading, which overall may have actually been kind of smart. And then other than that, she just has some like inflammation in her eyes and her vision is starting to get wonky. But the good news is that since she's at the weakest stage of the infection, there's still a chance that they can actually cure her. Next, we have Kobe and him, and these two right here are kind of sad because they got caught up in the virus outbreak and they were trying to stay so close together that when they started to sprout those bulbs on their body, they actually kind of fused. And I know that at this point in the series, Kobe wasn't like really a force to be reckoned with yet, but I still was hoping that he would have like some of a role to play and not just be another infected. The next infected character that we see is Mary, and honestly, I wasn't too moved when I saw him infected until I realized that if he's infected, that means that Kaya is also infected, and that moved me a lot more because I remember how much Usopp loved that girl. And I think the thing that really took me out about seeing this girl get corrupted is that even before the outbreak took place, she was already kind of sickly and depressed. So after the outbreak, it looks like she just fell deeper and deeper into that depression until she eventually just took herself out. And what makes this even more sad is that Usopp doesn't know at this point. So as of now, he's still dreaming about her and writing her letters, and she's just no longer here. Next, we see Arlong has also been affected, but what I find interesting about him is that he's not even sad about it. He actually became stronger when he got infected, and he went and infected the rest of his crew. And I think this is really dangerous because the fishmen were already strong before they got this little power up, so now I can only imagine how hard they can hit. The next infected character is Foxy, and some of you may remember this guy. I believe he's from the episode where he had to fight Luffy when Luffy had the afro and the boxing gloves. And this guy's already at stage 3 of the infection, but I don't imagine that he's probably going to play a huge role here, but we'll see moving forward. But I think this next group will be of much more consequence, and that's when we get to these CP9 members, starting with the Giraffe Boy here, who looks absolutely terrifying. You can see that the infection has basically like rotted out his neck. And while that obviously has like messed up his ability to breathe, apparently he can still survive, and it has not diminished his attack power at all. After that, we see Span, and I don't think that he's going to be a huge issue, but he is at level 5 of the infection. And we can see that it has rotted out all of his insides there, like his belly area. But I say I don't think he's going to be a huge problem because he's like the closest thing we have to a regular human in the One Piece verse, right? He's a normal dude. So even if he gets fully infected, I don't think that he's going to be able to really contend with these people with like Conqueror's Haki. Now, Rob Lucci is a whole nother thing though. Rob is actually really powerful, especially right now. And even in present day, he's still very strong. He's not as strong as Luffy Gear 5, obviously, but he can hold his own. And when you see his leopard form, he looks absolutely absolutely insane. And it seems like he's also at stage 5, and if I remember correctly, there's not that many more stages after that, so he's about to be fully corrupted here soon. And since we saw that the 2 strongest people were infected in CP9, I don't think anybody is surprised to see that the rest of the team is also infected. The 2 things that I do want to put out though is that Jabra apparently is the only person who actually tried to cure himself, although that obviously didn't work. And we can even see, like, when he transforms, his whole face pretty much, or at least his eye area, is covered in those yellow bulbs, so he can't even see. The only saving grace for him is that he has such a good sense of smell that he's not purely just attacking blindly, right? At least he can have an idea of where people are. The other thing that I found interesting is that Kumadori may not actually be infected. It looks like why the infection did actually get to this character, it may have all went to his hair. So they may actually get out of this unscathed, or at least relatively so. Next we have Kokoro, and I find it interesting that even though this person is infected, they're still trying to help people to the best of their ability. We also have Paulie, who is at stage 3 of the infection, and what I found interesting about this guy is that, as you can see here, he's growing like literal fungus out of his body and not just the yellow bulbs. And this makes this character extremely dangerous because those mushrooms are actually like spraying out gas continuously. And I wanted to make sure to highlight this guy because it just shows that even at like the earlier stages of the infection, some of these mutations can be super dangerous. We also have Iceberg, who is only at stage 1 of the infection, and overall this guy is still holding it together pretty well, basically just trying to protect his people. And when I say his people, I just mean he was trying to protect the people of Water 7, which is where he's a resident. Now this next one really surprised me because, as we see here, Kuzan ended up getting infected, or at least I think so. If you look right here where it says stages of infection, it's kind of frozen over here, so it's really hard to see. But I'm just gonna go ahead and take a guess because you can kind of see through the ice that a lot of his body is already infected and growing out roots. So I think that he basically just froze himself to either stop the spread or like stop himself from attacking people, because we all know that if somebody at this level, meaning an admiral, went like on a rampage, a lot of people wouldn't be able to stop him. Well, I guess except the magma dude. We know he already slapped him down. My leg! Now, speaking of powerful people getting infected, we see that Gecko has also fallen victim to it. And while it doesn't tell us exactly how he gets infected, it does tell us that he tried to use this outbreak to his own benefit. So I think while he was probably trying to take control of these zombies to like boost the power of his own little army, he ended up breathing in something or maybe getting bit, and now he is a part of this zombie army. At the moment though, it seems like he still has enough of his mind left to still be able to use his abilities though. We also see Perona here, and apparently she was infected because of Gecko. And even though she's infected, she's using her abilities to actually fight against the pandemic. It seems like she has a lot of resentment about what has happened to her, and she's hell-bent on basically helping the Straw Hats as much as she can because she's hoping that they can find a cure and stop her from turning even further. And let's just take a second to think how unlucky you have to be to get infected when you literally have the power to turn into a ghost. You would think that she would be one of, if not the only person who would be able to avoid this pandemic altogether. And then we see this character named Portia, and you may not remember her because she's from like the arc with Foxy, and I'm surprised to see her at level 6 of the infection. I feel like she is the furthest that we've seen thus far, and she was a very minor character in the series. But apparently it seems like the Marines are starting to do something here, because after the events on Long Long Island, apparently they took her away, and I'm assuming that they're probably going to do some experiments on her. But judging by how she looks and probably by how strong she is now, I would imagine that any regular Marines would get bodied by this character very quickly. Now, while I did just list off a ton of infected people, it's not all doom and gloom. There are still some people who managed to escape this. And let's start off with a funny one, and that's going to be Alvida and Buggy the Clown. And I put these two together because apparently these two have somehow managed to avoid being infected, which always surprises me how Buggy avoids almost everything. But also, these two ended up getting married. And while Alvida doesn't play a huge role in this series right now, I will speak about Buggy more momentarily. We also see that the Black Cat managed to get away, but I don't think he's probably going to play a huge role in this series moving forward. I probably think he's going to keep his head down and just keep it moving, try to avoid the infection. I don't really see him being a hero or cooperating with anybody trying to save the world from this infection. Now, we also see that Mr. 2 is still alive, and of course he's working with Crocodile in order to come up with this vaccine. And I'm going to speak more about Mr. 2 later, aka Bon Clay, because he does actually play a huge role in the animated portion of the series that's done right now. But I will say I was very happy to see that this guy survived because he is my favorite character in One Piece, hands down. And don't worry about why he has Chopper's hat. Everything is fine. Nothing's wrong here. We also see that Mr. 3 survives, but unlike Mr. 2, he's not going to play a huge role, or at least he doesn't yet. He's basically just like a prison warden, basically just keeping an eye on the doctor, making sure that she doesn't escape. But I imagine with his ability, he probably does fairly well in this world, because at least it would be hard for somebody to really get a good bite out of him, you would think. Now, another character that I was happy to see on the non-infected side is Garp, because we have some true villains on the non-infected side right now. And while I haven't shown you yet, Akainu is on this list, and this man has created a whole task force just to infect pirates with the virus. I suppose he said since he is immune to the virus, since you know he's a magma man, he doesn't really care what happens to the rest of the world. He's actively trying to stop people from finding a vaccine, hoping that he can weaken the pirates so much that the Marines can basically just take over. And if that's not bad enough, he also has Barcelona following his every order. And I suppose it's because this guy ended up getting infected at some point, and they used something called lifeblood, which I'll talk about later because it's going to play a big role in the series, to cure him. So now maybe he feels like he owes the Marines, so now he's just following their every beck and call. But Garp, on the other hand, has come up with a task force called the Special Purification Squad. And he's basically doing the opposite of what Akainu is doing and trying to reduce the spread of this and ultimately stop this virus altogether. But it seems like the only people who actually supported this in the Marines was Sengoku and Kuzan. And I'm starting to think I understand how Kuzan ended up being infected. I don't think he ended up being bit or walked into like some infected area. I think the Marines set him up, which is how he was able to get so deep into this infection so quickly and had to actually freeze himself. But I'm interested to see what the creator does with this little civil war going on in the Marines, because if there's anybody that can put up a fight here, it's definitely Garp. We know that he's obviously not as strong as he was when he was young, but he can still put up a pretty good fight, especially if he has a decent team on his side. Now, surprisingly enough, characters like Luffy, who I was sure would have eaten some kind of tainted food by now, has fully managed to avoid the infection. And when you look at his stat sheet, it even says when the infected come to him, he just basically beats them to death. And even though things are obviously getting bad in the One Piece verse, Luffy, being kind of the goofy guy that he is, still isn't taking this very serious. Nami is like the complete opposite though. She's obviously uninfected as well, but unlike Luffy, she is taking this very seriously. And that's why we see her early on in the animation with a full bodysuit on. She's not taking any risk on getting infected, and she's also kind of taking it on herself to keep Usopp in check, and we've kind of seen that already. Next, we see that Frankie is also unaffected, and initially I thought that was because he was a cyborg, but when looking at his stat sheet, apparently they found out that the virus can even affect metal. It makes it rust, so it's not the same as like with a human, but that's still kind of a big deal. And this is of course why he's wearing the gas mask. Now, another character that also is unaffected is Brook, but I'm not sure how much of a role he's going to play here because I don't think Brook was a part of the crew during this time period. So it'll be interesting to see like if the creator is going to bring Brook in at some point and how that would look, because since he's a skeleton, the virus can't affect him at all, meaning that he will be a huge boon to anybody. Now, technically, characters like Sanji and Chopper are also infection-free right now, but I'm going to hold off before I really get into talking about them because their story gets really interesting here in a second. And finally, on the unaffected list, we have Shanks. And I wanted to save this guy for last because he actually does play a huge role here, at least with giving us some details about this AU. But the thing is, it seems like he's lost his mind a little bit. And we see two examples of this. The first being when he's talking to Buggy on this ship here, with Shanks saying that you can't escape the darkness that is coming and that the plague is just the start of the chaos that will come in the future. And he's also refusing to tell Buggy anything else because he believes that death is inevitable, which rightly gives him a punch in the face by Buggy. Because even if you don't think that telling people will help, I mean, you should still at least warn people. I think Shanks has kind of been a butthole here. And the second time we see Shanks speaking about this is on his ship with his crew, where he's pretty much saying the same thing, but this time Mihawk comes to confront him. And Shanks tells him that the nightmares that he's been having are not just nightmares, but visions of the future. Which does make sense because Shanks does have very high observation haki to the point that he can briefly see into the future. So it wouldn't be too much of a stretch to think that he's actually seeing possible future outcomes in his dreams. And since Shanks can't describe it properly, Mihawk has him draw a picture of what's coming, but it just ends up with Mihawk thinking that Shanks has lost his mind. But I don't actually think that Shanks is crazy. I think these dreams that Shanks are talking about are basically just showing him how bad this infection will eventually get. And I say this because we do have a sheet that kind of tells us each of the stages, and it goes up to 7. We've seen stage 1 with Zoro, where it basically just gives you some body weakness, and of course you have those yellow bulbs all over your body. Stage 2 obviously gets a little bit worse with the roots growing out of them. And of course, this is where the mental fatigue also starts to come in. And at stage 3, we see that the roots come in even stronger now. But more importantly, this is where the person starts having those weird dreams. But I don't think that this is only for infected people, as we see here with Shanks. We see for stages 4 and 5, this is where people's bodies start to mutate, which is where Usopp is, obviously. And then lastly, we have the stages 6 through 7. And this is where the person basically loses all humanity. And in essence, they just become a mindless zombie who's going to attack anybody that they see, or like become a natural part of the environment. And when I think about the concept of becoming like a part of the natural environment, I think of The Last of Us, when some of those infected got so bad that they just became like a piece of fungus, either like on a tree or in a building or something like that. I think the same thing is going to happen with these infected. And while I know some of you probably didn't take the time to read through all of this work, because trust me, dude wrote a novel here. He basically tells us that anybody, regardless of their devil fruit, is capable of being infected. And as we seen earlier, even infected, they can still use their full abilities for the most part. Some people may get unlucky and kind of lose their physical abilities like Zoro did, but then we have people like Nico Robin who actually got stronger, or Orlon who actually got stronger when he got infected. And I think that is the reason that Shanks is so afraid right now. Because imagine at this point if somebody like Kaido or Whitebeard made it to stage 7. Between their Conqueror's Haki and also just their raw power and Devil Fruit, it would be a wrap for so many people. Now, we also see a bunch of fan theories in here that talk about what they think is going to be happening with this AU, but I want to focus on a theory that the actual creator came up with, and it's pertaining Haki. And he basically said that people with Haki, just like people with Devil Fruits, are not immune to catching this virus. Although people with strong Haki can actually fight against the disease better than people with weak Haki. The fan theories themselves aren't that bad though. You guys should check out Wasuga's TikTok channel if you actually want to see them. Now, after Shanks' dark prediction, the series takes a very sad turn. We see that the Straw Hats have been without food for a very long time, and in order to make sure that the crew doesn't starve, Chopper has volunteered to sacrifice himself so that they'll have meat to eat. And just judging off the faces of each of the crew members, you can tell that no one was thrilled about this outcome, with even Luffy looking horrified. But I think that the person that was hit the hardest from this was Sanji, who actually had to take Chopper out and then cook him. And you can tell by his face here that Sanji is broken in a way that will be hard to repair. And this is going to become a huge issue later in this series. And for people wondering what is blacked out here, it's Chopper's head and pieces of his body arranged around it. I don't know why it's blocked out here but shown in the thumbnail, but if YouTube dings my video for it, I may have to blur it out, but I'll give you a description. Now this next part, I'll have to watch my words, but as you can see here, Sanji seems to be very depressed over the death of Chopper. And when he looks up here, he's actually looking at a rope. And I'm sure you can understand what he plans to do with it when he's standing on this chair here. But before he can go through with it, we see that the GOAT Zoro comes through to stop him. And this makes perfect sense to me because while Sanji is definitely Luffy's left hand, there's a reason that Zoro is Luffy's right hand, or aka the second in command. When things get really bad, Zoro is always the one to step up and protect the crew. And I'm not saying that Sanji hasn't had his moments as well, I'm just saying that there's a reason that Zoro is vice captain. And luckily, after getting him down and kind of giving him a bit of a pep talk, it seems like Sanji is able to cry out some of that guilt and is able to carry on with living. But after that incident, the Straw Hats knew that they had to come up with a plan to help Sanji's mental health. So Nami actually went to go speak with my favorite character in the show, Bon Clay, and asked him if he would pretend to be Chopper. And since Bon Clay is always looking out for the Straw Hats, he's agreed to help, going to the ship and learning all he can about medicine so that he can be a convincing Chopper clone. We also see that Bon Clay speaks and hangs out with all the Straw Hats so that he can learn more about Chopper and also start to build a relationship with the crew, actually taking this job pretty seriously. And after 2 weeks, his hard work was put to the test. When the Straw Hats arrived at Skypiea, they told Bon Clay to walk out of the clouds disguised as Chopper. And their plan was to say that people that pass away on the Blue Sea have a chance to be reborn in Skypiea if they lived a life without sin. And Sanji buys it hook, line, and sinker, wrapping Bon Clay in a tight hug. And while Mr. 2 does feel guilty about deceiving him, he also believes that this is the best thing for Sanji's mental health at the moment, so he goes along with it. Now, after this, everything seems to be getting back to normal for a moment, with Luffy and the crew trying to figure out how they can explore this island and possibly fight Enel. But then we see Sanji make this face here, and you can tell that something is wrong with him. He seems to be questioning Chopper and asking why he seems so different now that he's been resurrected. And while they come up with the lie that the reborn lose some of their memory, we can tell that Sanji seems to be a little suspicious. We also learn that the plague hasn't affected Skypiea yet, simply because it's too high in the sky for the fog to reach, or for the gas to reach rather. So as long as the Straw Hats don't die here or start biting people, the island should be safe. But the most important thing that we learn here is that there is something on this island called lifeblood, which is basically a life cocoon that contains a blue liquid that can cure a person of any disease. And I'm sure you can all see where this is going. Basically, if Luffy can get this down to his grandpa or any like really good scientist, he can basically save the world with this, assuming that they can make some type of vaccine out of it. Because we know that it works for sure because it's already cured one of the admirals. But the main issue that they'll have to overcome is Enel, who has made it a law that he's the only one that can actually consume this liquid blood. And we see that Enel is definitely not playing around in this very next scene. We see Robin has come back from exploring the island and she witnessed someone being struck down by lightning, and she has concluded that the lightning strike was a warning, and Enel is basically telling them to get the heck off his island. But of course, Luffy being Luffy, he doesn't care and he walks off to explore the island anyway. In the next scene, we get this interaction with this bald dude named Pagaya and Usopp and Sanji. And at first, I thought this was just gonna be like some more filler, but we see that Pagaya asks Usopp what happened to his hand. And then we see him have like a full traumatic flashback. Now, I don't fully understand why Sanji did this, but it seems like it's a mix of the trauma from losing Chopper and also the effects of some nightmares that he's been having that are making him lash out, which makes me think that he may be going through something similar to like what Shanks is going through. We also learn that Robin has been giving him some type of medicine for this, but it obviously has like limited effectiveness because he's still lashing out. But I think the most important thing that we learn here is that this is just another reminder that Sanji is probably going to turn into a real villain by the end of this series because he's already heading down that path. Now after that, we see that Enel sends this super fast shrimp over to take the Straw Hat ship and everyone on it, which included Bon Clay, Zoro, Nami, and Robin, which honestly isn't a bad team as far as combat power. But with them being captured, Luffy, Sanji, and Usopp, I'm not sure what happened to Frankie here. Maybe he was on the boat as well, but it didn't say. But they head over to the city in order to find their friends. And in typical Straw Hat fashion, they get dragged into a bit of a side quest. Sanji sees this woman on the ground and learns that one of her waiters quit and that she needs a replacement. And Sanji, being the simp that he is, agrees to help. And during this time, as Sanji is kind of flirting with some of the ladies here, we see him get asked to sing, and he puts on like a full musical performance for the people. Now, I obviously can't play any of it because it's all copyright, but I do want to point out that during his singing, we see glimpses of like that darkness that is growing inside of him. And I assume that this may be why the cook gives him this Trump treatment. The only other thing I can think is that when the guard goes up to talk to the cook here, maybe he gave him the order to take a shot at him. But in all honesty, this whole little segment here was just kind of like a fever dream. But after that, we get back to the main plot and we see that Konis has set Luffy and the crew up with a ride to get to the second gate, which is the path that they need to take in order to get to their friends. But then Luffy says something that catches everybody off guard.
Hey Konis, why are you trembling?
We learn that Konis is the person that called the super fast shrimp to take their ship and has basically been setting the Straw Hats up because she doesn't want to anger Enel, and also because they are infected and she fears that they may be able to like spread the disease to the people on her island. And I guess the final reason as well is that she thinks that they may try to steal the lifeblood, which is a treasure for her people, and the Straw Hats are pirates, so it's not like they're above stealing. And when you really think about all that, she's kind of justified in her betrayal. But it seems like her conscience got the best of her because she really didn't need to spill the beans here. Luffy was actually mad at her because she told the truth, because he understood that that would just get her punished. And then we see this. if it wasn't for this character, I believe his name is Gan Fall, or aka the Knight of the Sky, Enel would have absolutely destroyed her here. The last thing that we see is Enel being warned that Luffy and his crew are making their way towards him, and while you would think that he would be worried considering that they have an infected person with them, Enel seems more intrigued than anything, giving off the vibe that he wants to capture Usopp and maybe the other infected people as well, even setting up a trial for them to go through, which just shows how arrogant he is. Because if Usopp or any of the other infected were to die in the trial or even bite somebody, his entire island would be at risk. But I think the fact that he kind of has a god complex is keeping him from thinking about this logically. And also in his defense, he may not know how bad the outbreak is down below. Now, I predict that in the next episode, Luffy is probably going to end up defeating Enel. We have seen him do this already, and he simply has the advantage over the guy considering that he's made of rubber. But one thing that I do want to acknowledge is that this fight is probably going to be harder than it was in the actual anime, because as you notice here, Enel actually has that lifeblood like inserted into his chest. And even though we already knew this, when you look at the hearts here, we can see that some of them are blue, kind of showing that this lifeblood is fortifying him, so making him stronger. But even with that, I still don't think there's a way that he's probably going to beat Luffy. So realistically, after they defeat him, they'll probably take the lifeblood and bring it back to Garp. And hopefully Grandpa's going to be able to do something with that to actually give the good Marines an edge in this war. The second kind of subplot that I think is going to happen as well is going to be Sanji. We've already seen that he's kind of going down a dark path. His mental state is really bad, even with Chopper being back alive, and I put that in air quotes. And we've also seen little glimpses of him obviously attacking Usopp. We've also seen him do it to Nami as well, and there's nothing to say that he won't try to attack any other members on his crew. And the thing that worries me is that right now, the only person that is stronger than him on the crew is Luffy, because with Zoro being infected, he's technically weaker than he should be. So I think Sanji probably takes the edge on him. The only other person that could probably put up a fight for him is Nico Robin, because with her infection, she actually became stronger. So that may put her close to being on par with Sanji. And the last thing that I know is going to definitely take place in this next episode is going to be this confrontation between Bellamy and Doflamingo. And it's hard to really call it a confrontation because it is very one-sided. For those of you that don't remember Bellamy, he's the one that got one shot by Luffy. So we know that there's no shot that he's going to be able to stand up against Doflamingo here. But more importantly, the fact that Doflamingo is going to be infected in this next chapter is going to be a huge deal, because no one on the Straw Hats currently can stand up to him. So I'm curious to see how the creator is going to add somebody that powerful in here and not make him just absolutely decimate everybody. Because we know half of the Marines are not going to help deal with him. They're just going to let him run rabid. So I suppose that Garp would have to be the one to check him. But with that being said, let me know what your theories are down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, check out this video on the screen here. And we'll see you tomorrow with another one. Peace, peace.